Great you could join us today. I just want to take us into our story today by asking a question. How do you react to surprises? Quite often a lot of work goes into creating a surprise, but it's often the reaction that is remembered and talked about most. You should have seen their face. That was brilliant, that reaction. It's the connection with how we respond that just resonates so strongly to ourselves and who the surprise is for. Now, when we hear the news of another, we sometimes respond too by, well, how did that person react? As if the news, well, that is what it is already. We can't change that. But how do they respond is still very important. Sometimes the response is the news itself. Here is the last of the signs of John, or what some say may actually be the penultimate sign, as the remainder of the book is sometimes seen as another complete sign. And what's remarkable about John's Gospel is that it focuses half of its Gospel on Holy Week. This story of Lazarus is the last story just before it. It's almost like a dress rehearsal, a discovery of how people might react. It's like John is bracing us for the real thing. It's almost where the early church that John is writing to is trying to know how to react to this new phase in their life as a church when people pass away. How do people react? Well, if this is their response to Lazarus, they haven't seen anything yet when it comes to the big event yet to come. And the way to explain this sign is not to have our attention drawn on Lazarus, but the story focuses more on how others react to the way Jesus deals with this situation. Lazarus' death draws out their attitude towards death and what they expect of Jesus and what he should do. The sign is how Jesus handles death, but also how he manages others in their response to death itself. Indeed, the story conveys here how the barrier of death is not the central issue, but what it will be in our minds, or the minds of the story here, and the challenge and focus of the living towards death itself. Death is overcome by life, but our response could be the death of us. During a time of crisis, that includes any type of loss, we can see there can be various reactions. It could be the death of us. We have some who view Jesus' response to the news of Lazarus as out of touch with the circumstances. They are organisers, and organisers like to be in control, and to control is a coping strategy. It's a denial that death makes it clear that life is out of our control. This denial robs us of exploring the emotional journey of loss and what that means to go through all of that as it should. Death and grief may accentuate it, but through life we could be organisers, and we could almost be compulsive in any kind of crisis, situation or loss. So an organiser's life is shaped by structure and routine, and that's a good thing too, but if it's an end in itself, it fails to go with the flow. It can stifle living. Jesus chooses to live in the moment, to go forward with the flow of things. Unlike Thomas in our story, let's leave now, Or Martha says, you could have come sooner. They're imagining another world that's ordered by them. So it would be helpful for some of us to explore what is happening to us emotionally when we strive to be in control, that we strive to organise. What's going on in our lives to be like that? Now we have others, like Mary, who are more lost in their emotions. They're not controlling their feelings, they are immersed by their emotions. The mourners who were with her would set the tone in the home and the way they behaved. Loss can be overpowering and very strong. And the challenge is that there can be a wallowing in grief where we can find ourselves stuck. Mary didn't even leave the house to greet Jesus, so consumed by grief. It's a natural feeling, but it's a feeling that needs to be like a river and not a swamp. Grief is sore and strong, and so can be the course of our flooding river. And in one sense that's overpowering. But we can be frozen or even stuck or sinking into the swamp. And it can be all so overpowering. Maybe we've experienced grief like that, and even dwelling on it now can feel emotionally claustrophobic. Why? Well, if we have not allowed ourselves to process this through, these emotions can become blocked or stagnant. A drain like that can really back up on itself and cause all sorts of stink. And when we suppress those feelings and they get blocked, we can lose the opportunity when we need to explore and experience them and move forward and to go with the flow. We don't have to experience such a response in grief. It could be any type of loss. Loss of a job, loss of a relationship, loss of a routine, loss of the familiar. All of these trigger the tempting choice that we just drown in our sorrows. So how do we avoid the extremes of either being stuck in our emotions or so in control of our emotions that we're not letting these things move forward? Well, we can see how Jesus has dealt with it in this story. The most genuine and self-contained reaction is Jesus when we read the shortest verse in the Bible, and it's in our Bible passage today, where it says Jesus wept. Here is the true reaction to another's death. He expresses his emotions. Now, some say it's because of the impact of death of someone he loved, or it's the sadness that death exists and happens to us all. Well, Jesus does one thing that we all need to do during loss, and that is to acknowledge our feelings for what they are at that time and embrace them. Whatever the reason, it comes from a place where Jesus owns his own feelings. And maybe we need to own our feelings too. You see, even though in this story he knows what happens next, what he plans to do, he still weeps. He knows the outcome, but he still wells up with sadness. He allows himself to process and move through these emotions. He does not fast track his feelings. He engages with them, acknowledges the impact that it has on him, but also on others, and gives them the space to process it through, even though they're trying to control it or they're swallowed up by it. It's interesting to see his reaction. When it says in our story, when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. I found that while working as a chaplain in the hospital, some are quite contained in their emotions. But with first sight of another member of the family arriving in, knowing of the news, that greeting and meeting reduces them to tears. It's the security where we can show our vulnerability. It shows that Jesus has both. He's in touch with his own feelings, but also the feelings of others. So maybe as we just draw this time to a close, think of a time when we've tried to control our life and it's become pointless to do so. Think of a time when we become stuck in our emotions, unable to heal. Are we controlling even now? Are we stuck even now? Well, think on that and what Jesus has done. What can we learn from Jesus in his reaction in our story today? But let's also listen sensitively to those where emotions have gone so deep and they need help and support to find a way out. So it's not just to think, it's not just to listen. The TLC is also to be caring by praying for those who've created a world where they think they are in control and really they're not. Or we care and pray for those where they're wallowed in a real sense of sorrow and are stuck. We need to pray to help them wisely and move forward. Thanks for your time with us today, and take care.